My name is Kerli Nurmoja. That's the 100% correct pronunciation of my weird Estonian name. And I am responsible for advertiser and partner insights at Spotify. I work mainly with European and APAC markets, but I'm also very involved in some of the global projects that we are doing at Spotify. And it's a really interesting role to have because I get a chance to work with our most mature markets. And also I get a chance, thank you, to follow some of our newer, more emerging markets like Turkey's. And before I kick off my presentation, I just wanted to share a couple of things with you. So when I was sitting there and waiting to get up on the stage, I was listing up all of the things that I'm excited about right now. And I'm this overly enthusiastic person, so it was 10 things that I listed up in my head, but I just want to share 3 of those with you before I kick off the presentation. So first of all, I'm just really excited to be here in Istanbul. It's one of my favorite places in the world, and I think it's something magical in the here. I feel that every time I come over. And Webrazzi specifically, I think the quality of the conversations and the presentations yesterday was really, really high. So looking forward to the rest of the day today as well. The second reason why I'm excited to be here today is that I get a chance to represent Spotify. I'm not only employed at Spotify, I'm also a dedicated and passionate consumer of the product. And I think there are many exciting things and changes going on in the music industry in general. And music is, it's a really powerful medium, really. It's scientifically proven that music can trigger parts of your brain that are really difficult to trigger otherwise. It can really empower any feeling you want to empower. It can relax you. It can make you more focused or energize you. And Spotify is not only a music company, it's also a tech company. And as you all know, technology is right now really changing the way we are living our lives, how we are communicating with each other, how we are consuming media, and of course, how we are consuming music as well. So excited to represent Spotify here. And the third thing that I'm excited about is that I get a chance to talk to you about data research and insights, which is really the area that I've built my whole career around. And if we think about just a couple of years ago, big data was the buzzword out there. Everybody was talking about big data. The buzzword today is content. And content is a much fluffier word if you think about it. I've heard many fluffy content presentations and fluffy content in my days. But with data and research, you can really create and communicate content that is relevant, interesting, and also trustworthy. So, for example, if I told you that I have a feeling that approximately half of the Turkish population knows about Spotify, then you shouldn't really believe me because I just have a feeling and I'm not even from Turkey, so how could I know that? But if I told you that we commissioned a big study with a global research vendor, TNS, and we learned that 49% of the Turkish online population knows about Spotify, then you should believe me because it's trustworthy and I've done my research before. So I think that with Insights, we have a unique opportunity to create and deliver content that is both relevant, interesting, and trustworthy. So these are the reasons why I'm really excited to be here today. And I will now walk you through some fast facts about Spotify, the first thing. Then we will be talking about a little bit what is changing in the world right now in general and when it comes to music consumption in specific. I will also give you some stats and insights around why brands should really care about the streaming audience. And finally, I will introduce you to this study that I just mentioned, the TNS study that we did in order to understand how Spotify users differ from the overall radio population in Turkey. So those are the things that we are going to dedicate the next 15 to 16 minutes to. So first of all, some fast facts about Spotify. We are now in 58 countries. We have launched in many markets during the last couple of years, which has been very exciting. And as you can see on the map, the world is literally getting greener. We have 75 million active users, so it's not only accounts, actually active users, people actively listening to Spotify. 20 million of them are paying subscribers, and the rest are free users. So Spotify is not only a consumer product, it's also a media platform, and we will be talking more about this later on in my presentation. We have over 30 million songs available at Spotify, but there is one more stat that is actually not on this slide, it should be, and that is that we have 1.5 billion, listen to that, 1.5 billion playlists created at Spotify, which is really a really important metric because it shows engagement. So our users are not only listening to Spotify and streaming songs, they are also creating their own content and mixing and matching the tunes for the relevant moments in their lives. Another thing that I wanted to tell you about Spotify is about a difficult but very important word, and that is ubiquity. And what I mean with ubiquity is that we really aim to be there for our users throughout their whole day. So we work with different companies all around the world to partner up with them, like for example with Uber. So we are able to be with our users while they are on the road in their Uber car, or when they are in their living room on the couch through our PlayStation partnership, or when they are on the go with the Starbucks or Nike partnerships that we have. So we will continue investing in these kind of partnerships, and this is one of the main reasons for that is really that we want to be there for our users throughout their whole day, from morning to evening, and why not during the night as well. So this was some fast facts about Spotify. Now I would like to talk to you about what is changing in the world that is also impacting the music consumption. So it's been really interesting to follow the conversations and the presentations yesterday, because a lot is about that, and a lot of the changes that are happening in the world are triggered by that technical development, obviously. And the first thing here, a global trend that we see, and of course there are differences between different markets and there are differences in different audience segments, but an overall trend that we see is that we are moving from an ownership model to an access model. And with that I mean that just a couple of decades ago, or just 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, it was more important for people to own things. So for example, we want to, of course, own our home, but we also wanted to own a vacation flat or a house in our favorite city or in a favorite country in the world. But today, we don't need to own anymore. We want to still have access and experience those things, but through that technological development and the companies that have built all of their whole business model around that, we can have easy access without needing to own those things. Same things with Uber. They were here yesterday talking about their business model. It was really interesting to hear. And same here. I myself had a car 10 years ago. I couldn't live with my car. Today I don't have it anymore. It feels quite unnecessary for me. And of course, again, there are differences. I live in the big city, but you understand the point. And same with your home theater. So for 10 years ago, you could go home to people and you could see all of these collections of DVDs, you know, remember the big shelves filled with DVDs? And the same with CDs and music. Today, we don't need that anymore. We can just access all of the movies, or many movies, through our Netflix account, or we can access all of the music in the world through our Spotify account. So it's a big shift happening, and we are moving from an ownership model to an access model. And I think that we will be seeing a lot of startups facing forward as well that build their own whole business model around that. Another interesting trend here that is also very connected to music consumption is that we are moving away from this kind of exclusive communities. So if you think about rockabillys in the 50s, or if you think about hippies in the 70s, or if you think about punk rockers in the 90s, then all of these groups were very defined and kind of packaged. So if you were a hippie, you were supposed to look a certain way. You had to wear certain clothes. You had a had to have a certain hairstyle, you had to talk about certain things and almost act in a certain way, and you had to consume a certain kind of music. So it's a very exclusive and packaged way that you needed to kind of be in, and of course it created a sense of belonging for people, but we are moving away from that, and everything is becoming much more individual nowadays. So we are building our own brands, and we can mix and match different things that are really unique to us, and we don't need to belong in a similar way that you can see in these specific communities. So when it comes to music in specific, we see that we now have different genres. And also here, we don't need to choose one or two genres that we kind of dedicate ourselves to or that we are loyal to. We can mix and match, and we do mix and match here. So for example, I can listen to dubstep when I'm working and need to focus, weird choice. And I can listen to classical music when I walk home through the park after work. And I can listen to pop or rock when I'm exercising. So I'm really mixing and matching these styles. And many people are doing that. And services like Spotify are, of course, allowing this to happen as well. Another interesting trend in the music industry is that it's not only from the consumer side, it's also from the artist side. So I don't know how many of you recognize this constellation here, but these three very different and very famous people have co-created content together and in that way delivered value to the users and their fans. And we see this kind of cooperation going on between artists more and more, and hopefully it will be even more in the future. So it's definitely changing. Another thing that I would like to walk you through now is about the streaming audience. So as I mentioned earlier, Spotify is not only a consumer product, it's also a media platform. And as we get more mature as a media platform, we need to be able to talk to brands and advertisers about the streaming audience and how the streaming audience is different from the general population or from non-streamers. So approximately 2 years ago, we sat there at Spotify and we were thinking about those things. We have a lot of data about our users specifically, but we couldn't prove what is the difference between streamers and non-streamers. So we commissioned this study with Comscore, a multi-market study, and we learned many different things. For example, some really logical things like streamers are more tech-savvy and they are more digitally ahead, which is a very logical kind of insight to get to. But there was one thing that we couldn't kind of, one insight that we found that was very surprising even for us. And that is the connection that we could see between streamers and non-streamers when it comes to brands. So streamers are actually more likely to think positively about brands than non-streamers. They are also more likely to be brand advocates, and even more so, they are even more willing to pay more for brands than non-streamers. And this itself is a really powerful statement and should prove that the streaming audience should be on top of brand owners and media buyers' minds. So a new audience is definitely arising, the streaming audience, both when it comes to music consumption, but in general, and the content distribution models are really changing. And the question is if your media strategies have changed. So I know that all of you here are not working with media, but just to get a sense, how many of you are responsible or in some way work with media and media strategies? Not that many, like maybe 5–10% of you. So for you, what I'm going to walk you through now will make a lot of sense. And for the rest of you, I'm sure you have clients or you have partners that have media strategies and that need to know that. But also, you will be able to contextualize these insights and this research from your unique position in the business world. So I'm going to introduce you to this study that I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, the TNS study that we did in 10 markets in Europe and that we are actually now launching in US, Canada, Latin America, and APAC. So it's becoming a global project. And we really needed to do this study because it was not enough for us to only talk about the streaming audience. We needed more specific insights for the media market that could prove that Spotify is actually worth adding to your media plan. So I will walk you through some of the key results from the study now. But first of all, there were three main things that we wanted to know with this research. First, how big is Spotify in terms of reach when it comes to comparing it with your local radio channels? The second thing, what is the difference between Spotify free users and the general radio population, meaning people that listen to radio frequently? And the third thing that we wanted to know was about listening behavior. So are people listening to radio during different moments than they listen to Spotify? So we found answers to all of those questions, and I will walk you through them now. So this is the stat that I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation. So indeed, 39%, 49% of the Turkish online population knows about Spotify. And obviously, this number, this awareness number, is higher among millennials, which makes total sense. The interesting thing here is that when we look at our more mature markets as Nordics or UK is, then we can see that the fastest growing audience group is actually the older target groups, and especially families are finding Spotify now. So I'm sure we will be seeing this trend in Turkey as well, but it will probably take 4, 5, 6 years before we get there. But just in 2 years, Spotify has been in Turkey in only 2 years. We've built up an awareness of almost 50%, which is amazing. The other thing that we wanted to understand was, as I mentioned earlier, how big is the Spotify audience in terms of weekly reach? And weekly reach it's a media language. Media planners use this to book media. So we wanted to understand how many people listen to Spotify versus other digital music services weekly. And Spotify is #1 in Turkey, followed by iTunes, SoundCloud, and Deezer. And this is the trend that we see in most of the European markets. I think we were #1 in 8 of the 10 markets. And if we would have had YouTube here, for example, then they would have a higher weekly reach. I think it was at 68% or something like that in Turkey. But YouTube is an online video platform, and we are comparing ourselves with digital music services here. So we are #1 in Turkey. The next slide I'm going to show you is quite heavy. You probably can't see all of the text and numbers here, but what we have done is that we have compared our reach with your local radio channels in order to understand how big would Spotify be if it would be a radio channel. And within the online population, in all age groups, we would be the 10th biggest radio station. So it's really interesting. When we did this study, we needed to, or our aim was to really reposition ourselves in the heads of radio buyers and brands, because they didn't believe that we reached that many people. But we ended up not only proving this to them, but we also needed to reposition ourselves in our own heads, because we were so used to working with our internal data, and these kind of numbers were overwhelming even for us. So this is among all of the population, but we also look at the millennials, of course, and among millennials, we are actually the 6th biggest radio station. So the reach is at 28% among them, even higher. And now we will come to the heaviest slide of my presentation, but I will talk you through this. So we saw the overall reach of your radio channels and of Spotify, but there are also people who listen both to Spotify and to radio, and there are people who only listen to radio and not to Spotify, and there are people who listen to only Spotify and not to the radio stations. So this is what we are going to take a look at now in order to understand what is the unique reach of Spotify. So how many are the people who don't listen radio, but who you actually can reach through Spotify and Spotify free service? So here you can first of all see the reach, the unique reach of the radio channels. And if you layer up on that, then we see the application. So these are the population numbers for people who listen to both radio, this specific radio channel, and Spotify free. And if we add up another layer here, then we see that the unique reach of Spotify is really high among millennials and among all of the population, really, especially millennials. So this was a very overwhelming slide for us to see, and we saw this trend in all of our, more or less in all of our European markets. And as I said earlier, we really needed to reposition our own audience in our own heads because we learned something new. So the first part that I showed you now was all about the quantity of our audience, how big is the size of our audience. So let's take a look at the quality of our audience now and compare it to the overall radio population, meaning people who frequently listen to radio. So first of all, if you look at user demographics, it makes total sense that our users are younger than radio population. I think everybody here agrees that it makes total sense. But the interesting thing here was that even though they are younger, they actually are more highly educated and they have a higher household income than the general radio population. And this means that the people who have higher education, they are the future decision makers. And people who have higher household income, they are consuming in a higher extent than people who have lower household income. So again, this is about the quality of our audience when it comes to sociodemographics. We also look at a couple of things that are more behavioral and attitudinal. So what we learned was that Spotify free users are more digitally ahead, meaning they spend more time on internet. They are also innovators, so they are curious to test new technologies and are more tech savvy. And the last thing, they are also social influencers. So they spend more time in social networks and they tend to share their thoughts and recommend brands and so forth in social media. So all of those three things, it was really clear that Spotify users are in a higher extent digitally ahead, innovators, and social influencers compared to the overall radio population. And of course, I have loads of stats around that as well. I didn't want to overwhelm you with too many graphs, so I just created this fluffy slide. But if you're keen to see the actual numbers, then we'll be happy to share this with you after Webrazzi. So we talked about the quantity of our audience, we talked about the quality of our audience. Now we will talk about the listening behavior. So during what moments are people listening to Spotify versus radio? And this really correlates to what I said earlier about ubiquity. Radio is, in all of our European markets, mostly listened to in the car, and also in Turkey while commuting. So this is the moment that is really owed by radio, which is also quite logical. But when we look at Spotify listening behavior, then we can see a broad variety of different moments from morning to evening and throughout their whole daily life. So we could see moments like work and school and focus, or shopping, travel, reading, exercising. People were literally saying that they listened to Spotify throughout all of those moments. Other interesting things that are not on the slide here, for example, people are, this is actually from our internal data, people have created loads of showering playlists. So they're listening to Spotify when they are in the shower. And also a moment like relaxing, which is not usually something that you do when you listen to radio. You're more lean forward. So we can conclude from this that radio owes the car and commuting, but Spotify has a wider range of moments really throughout the whole day of consumers' lives. And this is exactly what I explained to you. Another thing that we can mention here is that we are a tech company, as you know, and we are developing our targeting capacities. So what we are able to do now for brands and advertisers is that we can target advertising during a certain moment. So This means that Nike, for example, can target users who are listening to or have listened to exercising playlists. And this opens up a totally new way of advertising and reaching consumers during relevant moments, because they are more receptive to communication messages that are relevant for the moment where they are in. So we talked about a lot of things now, but if we just would conclude 3 things that I would like you guys to remember from this presentation, then it is that Spotify's free service has a unique audience reach. So as we said earlier, we are the 6th. If we would be a radio channel, we would be the 6th biggest radio channel among millennials. And more than that, we have a big, unique audience that cannot be reached through radio. The second thing is that we have a quality audience, and I think I've proved my point. There's been many slides around that already. And the third thing is that Spotify captures consumers' attention during different moments of the day. And this is really something that we continue investing in, as I said in the beginning of the presentation, through our partnerships and through our Ubiquity strategy that we've worked on. So this was all from me, and I'm really keen to hear. I wish we could have an interactive sessions. It's always very valuable, but if you guys have any questions, or if you have just reflective thoughts around the content that I delivered to you, I would love to hear that. So especially because it's not so many media people here, I'm keen to hear how you contextualize the content that I just delivered to you. So my email address is there. It's kerli@spotify.com. Please let me know your questions or feedback, or get back to Ergul and our Turkish team. They know all about everything that I just walked you through. So thank you. You've been an awesome audience.